Hello and welcome to another show of Teaching Mathematics. Today we're joined by Leigh. Hello, Leigh.
Hi, very nice to be with you.
Oh, welcome. And of course you can join the conversation by using the hashtag VTMats. And Dylan is behind the buttons, clicking away, making sure that we all go through live. Now, Leigh, before we begin, this is your first time with us in the studio.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been a maths teacher for many, many years. We won't tell you how many. And I've been head of departments in several schools. But at the moment, I'm holding a wonderful position. I'm working with a group of 10 schools. And what I do is I oversee the whole maths vision of the 10 schools. I'm responsible for the teacher development in the 10 schools. So it's a very exciting job.
It does sound exciting, but it also sounds like the kind of job that other people don't enjoy your company in.
There are moments. But usually, it's very much a people kind of job. You have to negotiate and talk and those sort of things. But yes, there are moments when I don't think I'm very popular.
Okay. So do you just make sure that people are teaching the right content?
Well, we're running a very specific syllabus as such, but we also check through benchmarking and testing. So my job is to make sure that not only do we look at the children's development over several years, but we also look at how the teachers are doing with those particular children in the classroom on a regular basis. So it's a lot of assessment, and so it ranges from grade 1 right through to grade 12. So it's actually the whole lot. And it's a very different kind of ball game, but it's interesting because there's lots and lots of assessment opportunities for me as the person in charge. I also make sure that the standards are up and that if possible we can improve. Anyway, we improve.
It sounds like we have the right person to talk about assessment today.
I'm quite passionate about it, actually, as you may have gathered.
Yes. We are talking about assessment from grade 10 to grade 12, but I think in general these assessment practices can be applied
Definitely.
From the bottom.
Definitely. I think high school teachers are much more aware of these practices. Primary school teachers are becoming more aware, especially with the ANAs that are running.
Yes.
So they sort of know about it, and so they're aware. And I know one of the things that I'm aware of is that you, not only do you have to have the practice, but you also have to understand how to use that practice to improve. So
yes.
So that's what we are busy doing in my group of schools anyhow. We don't have ANAs, but we have something equivalent.
Yes, so I'm sure they're pretty much applied on the same basis.
Exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
About measuring and seeing where the children are, seeing where the teachers are, making sure that the time and task is happening.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, before we get too deep into it, and we've got lots to talk about, it's an exciting topic.
No, it is.
Yes.
A contentious one, but an exciting
That's
one.
what makes it so exciting. So that you can talk for hours. Yeah. I would like to talk through this book that I've been reading. Mm-hmm. It's called Teach Like a Champion, and it's got 49 actionable steps. So actionable means we can actually do them with very little effort. And it's basically aiming to become a champion teacher. Oh, that term irritates me. So I heard someone else recently referring to someone as a champion. Oh, what do you mean a champion? Have they won any sports awards?
Yeah, well,
anyway,
I've actually been reading a lot of work of James Strong, who's Dr. James Strong, who's from America, and he's very big into the effective teacher. He calls it the effective teacher.
That makes more sense to me.
Yeah, and it's a really effectively, it is the same as a champion, because to be effective, you've got to be a champion.
Yes.
But it
doesn't
better.
sound patronizing.
No, not at all.
And that's what this feels like. It feels like you need a carrot to be a better teacher. No one actually wants a carrot for being a better teacher. They want to be a better person, and part of that is being better at what you do.
Yeah, well, I think also teachers teach because they're passionate about children, and they want to make things better for children.
Yes.
Bottom line. So, that is why they want to be the best they can be. Yeah.
Oh, one of my lecturers said, and I know we're going a little bit off topic, but I'll stop after this. One of my lecturers once said that no one becomes a teacher because they don't want to change the world. Everyone.
So true.
The original reason they become a teacher is because they want to change the world.
I quite agree with you there.
I think a lot of us lose our way. And we
sure
get bogged down in all sorts of things. But, yeah, our original intention.
And it's always good to keep your focus on that original intention. So
yes.
when things are going wrong, just remember why you're actually doing this.
Yes.
There's a good reason.
Now, this week's actionable step is actually about focusing your attention. And it says post it. And it basically says put your objective of the put your objective of the lesson on display in the class. So when they walk in and they sit down, they'll immediately see the spot on the board where you've typed out something or written something that tells you today we are doing, by the end of today you will be able to do the difference of 2 squares. Or today we're going to discuss, I don't know, pork chops. So that they have a clear objective, yes.
In fact, that is so important, because we had a visitor to one of our schools from Singapore, Dr. Ban Ha. Yep, and he, at the end of every lesson, asks the children, so what have you learned today? And you'll be amazed what they come out with. Certainly not the objective you had in mind a lot of the time. So I think it's actually very good to do that.
That would be very interesting.
Very interesting. It really is an eye-opener. You get a whole variety of answers to what you were doing in that lesson.
Yes.
Often very incidental learning happening that you didn't even think about, and the children are coming out with what they did.
I suppose it's a good way of assessing what's been covered.
Very much so, because you can see exactly what they've taken from that lesson.
Yeah.
It's very good.
I did have another thought about this, but I'll come back to it when I remember
it.
I think this links on nicely from last week's actionable step, which was the 4 M's, and it was in terms of planning a lesson. You had to do something you had to find a piece of content that was manageable to teach within that section. Don't plan too much, rather plan just enough, but then on top of that, it's got to be measurable. So the manageable, it's actually a goal. It's not, I'm going to teach about factorizing trinomials. By the end of this lesson, they need to know how to do the specific skill within that.
No, I agree with you. That is really important.
So the manageable thing would be the objectives that you would put up in your classroom, the post-it that we're talking about now. And then the measurable would be the assessment that we're about to talk about.
Which, as I say, is my passion. I must say, you always hear these sayings that assessment drives practice, and I actually think it does.
Yes.
To a large extent.
I was actually thinking just now while we were walking up, I thought too often people view teaching and assessment as 2 different things.
And I think, in a way, the training we get as teachers lets us down, because it's sort of taken almost like you will just get it.
Yes.
Now, when you get there, you'll know how to assess. In the meantime, no formal training is being given, and you walk into that classroom, and usually the head of department will say to you, please set this test.
Yes.
And you'll think, how on earth am I going to do that? And she'll say, well, go and look at the old files, or whatever, and you'll look and you'll dig, and then you'll, by osmosis, get there. But basically, you'll learn the hard way, because no one has actually given you any guidance. Interesting thought to bear in mind for teacher training in the future.
I wonder, though, if the hard way isn't a good way to learn it.
Look, it is partly, but some people still struggle, even though they're learning the hard way. Some people will manage and cope with it, but sometimes you need to be a little bit more specific about what is required and give more help.
Yes.
Yeah. I often find our first-year teachers will come sit with me when they have to set a test, and we'll talk through, and I'll throw some ideas at them, and I'll say, what do you think? And I'll get them to decide, but at least give them some guidance to get going.
Yeah. Well, you definitely, especially with things like leveling and question progression and things like that, but we're going to get into that. Let's start with the program. Now, when we first spoke about this, I didn't quite know how to talk, how do you define assessment or anything like that. So I decided we would talk about the what, when, where, why, just so that we could cover all our bases, really. So let's start with the what. And you've written there are many forms of assessment. There is informal and formal.
Yes.
And the informal would be oral and observation. Often both of those are overlooked.
They certainly are, and I don't think we realize the value of them as an assessment tool. Mostly because children are driven by marks and they want to see their mark. But for us as teachers, that makes a huge difference.
I think you've touched on something interesting there that I know you're going to come back to later, and it's not just about a mark at all. That's not what assessment is.
It's what the children think it is, but it's not really that.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, we will get there.
Yes.
And then the formal assessments are multiple choice, group work, worksheets, and written. Are there any types of assessment that you've left off there?
Yes, I'm sure there are, if you start to really think about it enough. I mean, those are the ones that sprung to mind of what I use generally. But I'm sure there are many other options. I don't know. Have you got any ideas that I've left off?
Recently, we had someone come in and talk about using drama in the science classroom. I wondered how we could use drama in the maths classroom and then use that as assessment.
Well, you know, portfolio was an attempt to get us to do that kind of thing. So really speaking, if you've got a child who's autistic, it's a lovely way for them to actually express themselves. You get them to write a rap song on some mathematics, and they will enjoy it because it's something different. So yes, that's a form of assessment as well. And so the portfolio was originally designed for that, but I think they became a little bit too controlling about what the pieces had to look like in the portfolio, which then took away the individual creative side that you could use to help a child access good marks.
Yes, Dylan.
Quick question, if I may. How importantly is it for our assessment techniques to be sensitive to the kinds of kids we've got in our class and the ways in which they're wired to learn?
I think that is so extremely important, because if we don't give a child every opportunity to show what they know, we're failing them. And I think that, you know, if you're just giving written test after written test after written test, there are lots of reasons that a child will find that extremely stressful. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but definitely, you know, you don't see the best of a child in a situation like that.
Yeah.
There are other ways that we can do it, and we can find out what a child knows. And a written test also might not really give you a true picture, depending on the day, the time, etc. So I think we owe it to them to offer them options that can show what they know. Because that's what you're trying to find out when you assess. So what do your learners know? And actually, back to that Dr. James Strong, he talks about taking children and moving them forward. So you would start with a certain, like a pre-knowledge or pre-test, and then you look at a post-test.
Yes.
And in the post-test, you can see how much you've moved their understanding along. So that's a nice way of doing it too, to see the growth of an individual child.
And my favorite types of tests are actually those pre-tests, those diagnostic tests where you can find out where the issues are.
Yeah, and those can be oral too. There's no reason that need be written.
Very definitely.
Yeah, so, you know, you can ask them questions in class, get feedback.
Yes. Yeah, in many ways I think they're almost more important than the end of the section test. But in terms of marks, you need something.
Yeah, you do need, you have to keep to the requirements of CAPS, basically. And so you do need to produce what is necessary there. But also you must do it carefully, because there are other ways you can get the continuous testing, continuous assessment going.
Yeah. Okay, now we move on to the why. There's lots of reading over here.
Yeah, sure. It was quite a few points there.
Okay, the why. The first point says a way of establishing what your learners have learned.
Yes.
I think everyone would just give that answer. Why do we assess?
That is the main reason that not the main reason, it's one of the reasons that we actually say, but it is the one that most people would answer, yes.
Yes.
And yes, we do need to know what our learners learn, but we also need to know what we've taught, how it's been understood, how it's been dealt with, and whether we can do something to change that result.
Yeah.
So there's more to it than that.
The next point says a way to move the lesson in the right direction. That's interesting. What do you mean?
That one is very much like, you know, especially with your idea of oral or pre-testing, you would ask them some leading questions. So perhaps if you were introducing, say, calculus, you would ask them about your f of x notation.
Yes.
And then if you see no one in the class has the faintest clue what you're talking about, you know to direct your teaching to that before you even engage with your calculus. Or you might ask them about average gradient, and you'll see that they actually don't remember gradient, never mind average gradient. So what I'm meaning by that is that you, by that oral questioning, or even you could do it written, it doesn't matter, but probably easier oral, you can then see where the needs of the students are and whether you need to recap this, because you could end up recapping and boring half the class to death.
That's very
true. So
you
need to just be aware of that.
That's a typical beginner teacher mistake, isn't it?
And is that what you mean, Leigh, by assessment driving practice?
Definitely. And also when you look at even your formal tests, you can change your practice when you see, gosh, my whole class has done really bad at this section. What did I do How can I make a difference? So you take ownership of it, because sometimes the kids are lazy and don't do what they should do. We know this. But sometimes we've explained in too abstract way. We haven't done enough concrete work. We haven't given them enough opportunities to play because we're rushing to finish syllabus, etc. So definitely. I think I'm getting too excited about assessment.
I don't know. I do remember one time where a test result came back and there was one question they all got wrong, and I knew I'd taught it. So I went back, being a young teacher at the time, I hadn't quite developed properly, and I told the class off for not getting it. After some reflection, and I think some guidance from my head of department, I realized that maybe the problem wasn't with them. Maybe it was with me and my explanation.
It's not that you did a bad job of explaining. It just wasn't the appropriate way to explain to that bunch of students how to do it.
Yes.
And so with a little bit of refining on that, you might have made all the difference.
You're far too diplomatic. Of course it was my fault.
Well, that's very honest of you. You've taken ownership.
I'm quite happy with the fact that it was my fault. I won't tell them which class it was and who they were.
Don't tell them. Never admit those things to children or parents.
No.
Never a good idea.
Never.
Fix the practice and don't do it again. Yes.
Okay, realizing where more information is needed for particular learners.
Yeah, and that is where, again, would be like, say, your calculus example, where you see that half the class don't remember functional notation. And then you could, like, put a spreadsheet together, not a spreadsheet, a worksheet together and get them going on that. Or you can do some extra teaching, or you can get the children who know what's going on to explain to those that aren't.
Yes.
Knowing what's going on.
Or you could find YouTube clips that are appropriate.
There's wonderful YouTube clips you can access.
Yes.
So there are lots of ways, it just depends how your technology, how much you've got in the classroom.
Yes.
You can definitely use...
there is a caution with YouTube.
Use the Khan Academy, if I'm allowed to mention it. That's a very good point.
You must watch the clips from beginning to end, though.
And I know that you've got lots of material.
Oh, yes, our stuff is wonderful.
And you just got to pick someone reputable, because there is a cautionary note. You have to be careful.
You must definitely watch every clip that you
before you show the
recommended.
children, definitely.
Yeah. There's so many teachers who put up a trig clip that's got an American accent, and then suddenly they're working in radians, and they've done 5 times as much damage as they would have done if they had just taught it badly to begin with.
You're quite right. That is a very good cautionary, because it's true, they work in radians, not in degrees.
Yeah.
And that's true for Singapore and for a few other places as well.
It's actually very difficult to find degrees.
Yeah, you're quite right. It's probably on Mindset where you'll find them.
There we go. The next point says multiple choice way of, yes, I haven't skipped one. Multiple choice, a way of acquainting the learners, thank you, with the form of assessment that will they will encounter in the NBTs and at university.
Yeah, the universities have gone this whole trend now of making the children, suggesting strongly that the children write these national benchmark tests.
Yes.
For whatever reason they use it, but they do go that route. And what we found initially is the children had, for a large extent, not been exposed to multiple choice questioning. And as a result, they would go in there and they wouldn't have a clue how to handle it, and they would do really badly. So I think it's quite important that in our assessments we give the children opportunities to do that, because then they learn the techniques of being clever and how they answer, different ways of approaching multiple choice.
Yes.
I always joke and call it multiple guess, because that's how most children handle it.
Yes.
Like, okay,
I haven't had an A for a while.
Yes. Or let's put BC all the way down and see if we get lucky. That's the kind of thing they do. But you've got to teach them, because universities are also using that to help with their first years, where they've got huge amounts of children that they're assessing. Or not children anymore, young adults, and they need to find an effective way of doing it. So I think we owe it to the children to expose them to it, and to give them opportunities to try it out.
I'd like to talk a bit more about multiple choice questions when we get to the how. Let's move on to group work, a chance to allow assessment that enables learners to work with peers to clarify thinking.
Yes. I think a lot of the time, especially in subjects like geometry, children would just hit a wall too soon. So group work is a really nice way of them using like collaboration, if you like, to move along. So they might get stuck at a point, but a friend will say, oh, but hang on this, and then it will set them off again.
Okay.
Because I think that is a big problem. So yes, it's not a pure in the sense that you don't know exactly what that child knew, because they would have stopped and not carried on going. But in a way, it's quite nice because it prompts them to keep moving.
Okay, so this is a group work activity that they submit together. It's not pure assessment.
Well, you could also use peer assessment in it. You have to be quite clever about that, though, because, being peer assessment, if it's your friend, you want to give them good marks. And so a little trick you could use with it is you could say, there are 4 of you in the group. You've got 37 marks to share between the 4 of you.
Oh, my word.
So no one can get full marks.
Yes.
Well, they could, I suppose, but then someone would lose out. And no one can basically, you can't give everyone 9. This is not going to actually work. Well, you could give 9. You can't give everyone 10. So that kind of thing. So you make it a bit more difficult for them. But I don't know if it really serves a purpose like that. I think I would prefer to give them the group work, let them grapple with it, and then maybe give them one to do it on their own, which they hand in.
Okay.
And then effectively you find out what they've learned or gathered from learning from their friends.
With something like geometry, you could literally just invert the image that you've given to them for the...
They'll never recognize it. That's
never.
the bright side. Change a few letters, swing it around, and it's a different question.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. A very nice way to also get them to assess geometry is to take a problem and just give them the shape and say, okay, how many questions could you make up in this?
That's fantastic.
So that would force them then to go and look and see I know this is equal to this, so I could ask that.
Yes.
So then it gets a much higher level of thinking from the children.
And a huge amount of engagement within the content. It's not just, I know this, I know this, I know this. It's, let's try and find out more. It's different spin.
And you can also see what level the child's at, because if they can only engage with the very easy questions of this equals this, and they can't go beyond where they have to go a little bit more depth in the thing, you know that's where the child is limited. But any group work is a great way for them to be less anxious. I think that is what the advantage is for me.
That's a big problem. Yeah.
Because I know that some children suffer from such major maths anxiety.
It's so unnecessary.
It is, but you've got to try and get them right on that.
Yes.
And I believe, like, if they write a test and they have this problem, I usually let them write the test in the class and I take that mark. But then I let them come after school and retake the test. And then I show them, look, without stress, without anxiety, without the pressure,
limits,
look how much better you're doing. So now let's try and work on how we can get you better at this. What can we do to relieve the anxiety, etc. But they don't realize till they see, okay, without the anxiety I can do better. Then they start to relax about it.
That is a very complicated issue.
It sure is.
Yeah.
It sure is.
Okay, assessment of worksheets similar for formal tests, but no time constraints and more relaxed environment. I think that's what you've just been talking about.
Basically, yes, because a worksheet, you can also ask just about everything in it, whereas a test, you've got to be selective.
Yes.
You've only got a certain amount of time, and you've got to make sure you cover the right levels, etc., which we're going to talk about just now. So, yes, I think a worksheet gives you an opportunity to go into much more depth. And they don't have the pressure of having, to do it in an hour. They can sit and take all day about it if they want to. Probably they won't, but that is the idea, that they are in that position. Plus, they can go and talk to you or ask a friend on how to get going. Because I think half the problem with assessment is they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And when a formal test, they can't get any hints or tips or whatever. So, I think that is important.
Yeah, I've got a nephew who's in grade 5, and he thinks he's now great at maths, and I'm sure he's doing really well. So, but the problem is, he thinks now because he's great, he's not practicing.
Oh yes.
So I said to him, it's one thing to get it right, but in order to do well in maths, you have to get it right and in the right amount of time. So you must practice being fast at being right.
No, you're quite right. And being right, sometimes they've got to be careful what they're actually being right at. Is it all easy, simple questions, or is it a bit more demanding, requiring a little bit more thought?
Yes.
And the grade 5 still early and young, so probably not the problem.
Yes.
Actually, I love going down to our little grade R's in there because they're like little puppies still. So it's quite refreshing. And even there you assess, but it's all very oral there.
Yes.
Yeah, it's written, definitely not written.
Yeah. They do sorting as an assessment.
Yes, they do
don't
lots of sorting, number rings, and you're checking on them, clapping the right numbers and those kind of things. So
I
they do
wonder if we
assessment.
could use sorting in the FET phase.
Yes, I suppose you could. You could certainly take qualities and say tie to geometry. Put a picture up and say, okay, all of these are here. Which of these qualities would apply to this picture?
Or in functions, which function has undergone the same shift?
Yes. And they could choose the ones that are vertical shifts or horizontal shifts.
Not just a pretty face, Dylan. Not just a pretty face.
Dylan was quite surprised by that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is an awesome question.
Yeah, it is.
That's a really wonderful question.
I think it's a fabulous idea, classifying it. Very good. Okay. 10 out of 10, Helen.
Thank you. Well, I'm done. Let's go.
Program finished.
The last point says a way of monitoring the success of your teaching.
For me, that is the most important part of assessment. Because if I bear in mind every single time I assess, what I'm seeing is a result of what I've taught, or hopefully they've learned.
Yes.
We can see if there's a little bit of a disconnect between what I think I'm teaching and what the children are learning. And I can go back, and that's the one good thing about your classroom. You are the master of that classroom.
Yes.
And so, yes, you can go back and say, look, let's try a different way of doing this. I see in the test you didn't do so well in it. Let's try this and see if it helps. Or you can, it really is an opportunity to shape. And even if it doesn't inform you immediately that year, the next year you will bear in mind that did not work so successfully for my students. Let me bear in mind, maybe teach 2 ways of doing this thing, and then the children can choose the one that suits them best.
Which one?
Yeah. So I think it's a great way of seeing it, and also for knowing if you're an effective teacher. Are you moving these children along? Are you getting these children in and making a difference in their lives? Which I think is important.
Yes.
And I never forget my first year of teaching, I had a boy. He'd never passed maths in his entire school career, and he was in grade 10. And this boy just ate every word of maths. He just loved it to bits. And I was teaching him English and maths at that time. And shame, he failed everything but maths. But he was ecstatic. And he actually left school after. It was such a tragedy. But he was ecstatic because he finally passed the one subject he could never access. And I was so sad for him, but in a way I could see his joy because he'd actually mastered the one thing that had been eluding him for 10 years. So.
Stories like that make me miss teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a difference.
Yes. Shall we move on to where and when? We put them
Definitely.
together because they're pretty much the same thing.
Definitely. Certainly most of the assessment happens in the classroom. Of course, worksheets and things like that are done outside the classroom or inside. You could even control it. One of the things I've learned by being a portfolio moderator is if the marks are going to count for something substantial, it should be done in controlled circumstances.
Yes.
Otherwise, as you say, you can Google something, you can find out on YouTube, and so you're not really getting to the essence. So yes, you can give them a worksheet, but make sure that if it's going to count, not too much, because you don't want them to inflate their marks unrealistically.
Yes.
I know they do all those alterations on marks and stuff at the end of the year in matric, but you don't do it in grade 10 and 11.
Yes.
So yeah.
Now, okay, so this is I think slightly differently about this topic, because I think if you are giving something to go home or anything, then you must expect them to consult outside resources.
Well,
and it must be an extra maths teacher or a parent or a Google or a video or whatever.
I agree with you there, but I'm just saying that you must be careful how you weight that mark.
Okay.
Especially for your matrics, not so much for your grade 10s and 11s. That's really your call. It's your class. But when you're sending them up to a final exam, I know as the portfolio moderator, I used to see these huge, inflated send-up marks. And I knew they were going to lose them because basically they'll adjust within 10% of what they get in the final.
Yes.
All right, 10% means that they get a 3% benefit, but still it is sad for them to lose it. So I think it depends what level you're talking about, but I agree with you. It's nice that they're going to look. I love flipping a classroom. That's another one that is really great to do. Let them learn at home and then come do the work in class.
Yeah.
Where you're there to supervise and see to it.
Yeah, and where you're on call.
We don't get enough time actually for that, and that's what's nice.
Okay, so the where and when says mostly in the classroom except for worksheets. The informal happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yes. And
All
if
the
you are
time.
standing up at the front of the classroom and teaching and not walking around and finding out what's happening in your classroom, then it's not happening.
No, it's not happening. You're quite
No.
right. Standing in the front, a lot gets away from you.
Yes.
I've noticed all the computer science teachers always sit at the back of the class, and that's so they can see the screens of their little darlings and see what they're up to. So maybe we should learn from that, sit at the back of the class and see what's going on. But I agree with you. You need to walk around and see what's happening.
It's often a safety place for teachers. They don't walk around because they don't want to engage, and they don't.
And also, it can get quite hectic, especially in a maths class, because this one will call you and then the one on the other side wants you and it's in the wrong spot, and, you really can get quite out of control. And one of the things I've seen a colleague of mine do which I think is quite excellent, she would tell them, as you need help, write your name on the board. And then she would go to the children as their names were appearing on the board.
Okay.
So it gave her some control about who needed help first, so that she didn't leave the poor child who was sitting on the opposite side of the class doing nothing till she got there 4 hours later.
And the one that's unconfident, who never puts their name on
that's the risk, you see. And that's where group work is quite nice, because they're too shy to speak in the class,
then
but they're not too shy.
Group name on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it helps them. It gives them a little bit more confidence to be brave, because they're not alone and they can consult.
Yes.
So I think group work is a great way, and even pair work is better than not letting them work at all. But you're right, some children will never put up their hands because they feel too exposed by admitting they can't do it.
Especially maths, where there is so much emotion tied up into
Very
being
much
right
so.
or being wrong.
And of course with maths we know that if there's any how can I say, issues in the life, like a boyfriend that's broken up with them, or straight away the maths marks affected. Any tragedies at home, anything like that, it's immediate. It's not even, all the other subjects will survive, but maths will take a tumble.
Yeah.
It just seems to work like that. And I think it's got to do with the part of the brain that you're accessing.
Yeah.
So
I think that's why the maths teachers are so special, is because we can spot these kinds of things immediately.
I agree with you.
And
you see this result and you see this child's really been your star students, and suddenly they're sitting at 30%. I will usually go to them and say, is there anything that's happened that I need to know about? And you'll hear, oh, this happened or that happened.
so assessment is also another way of graphing how they are as a person at that point.
Definitely. And long term, if you assess properly and regularly, you can get a picture of this child that other people won't get.
Yes.
You'll be able to write much more meaningful comments on each child, because you'll have a very good picture of it. So I think it's an awesome way to do it. Yeah.
I think we need to add that to the why to assess.
Yes, actually, that's true.
Okay, more on when and where. Short formal tests at strategic points during the teaching.
Yeah, sometimes you need to be sure that something is in place before moving on to the next thing. And so even if it's like a matter of you've given them homework, or even a worksheet, a substantial worksheet, and you want to see now what they have retained of that, you could give them 2 or 3 of those questions as a quick test when they walk into class. Take that in, mark it, and it'll give you a feel of the class's response and growth in that area. But so I think it's important. The risk of the short test is that you sometimes get an inflated view of what the child can do.
That's an important point to bring up.
It can, especially if you're doing a topic like, say, exponents, and then you would be teaching them, say, multiplying. And then as soon as you introduce the add and subtract, it becomes a much more complicated thing to learn. And they fall short. And you think the exponents were looking really good, but they were only looking good for multiplying and dividing.
Yes.
So you just got to be careful of those short tests. And even if it's on a whole section of work, even that sometimes won't show you enough of what the child knows, because they're concentrating on that. My nephew was a great test taker, and he hated a test and loved an exam. And I said to him, why is that? Because most people are so anxious about exams. And he used to say to me that with an exam, if you've got a bad section, it doesn't matter. Because you've got so many other sections you can do well in. Whereas in a test, and that test is all on that section, you're dead in the water.
Yes.
So that's a different way to look at it.
Yes.
I certainly never thought about that before he told me that.
I used to talk to my classes about strategic examining, where you you do the sections that you know you'll do well in first, and then leave everything.
That's so true. That is an excellent way of doing it.
Tests.
Unfortunately, children don't do that naturally.
No,
you have to show them that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Worksheets at the end of a section.
I think I've mentioned already there that the reason I like it is because you can go into so much depth in the worksheet. You can give them so many examples of how the section can be asked.
Yes.
That you can't do in a short test of an hour or half an hour or whatever. You need, a worksheet can be 2-3 hours long of work, and they can really go into every kind of question you can think of that they could get asked. And so they know, so when they get to the test, they know, okay, that's a way of asking it.
Yes.
Of course, as wily teachers, we'll always find a way that they haven't seen before.
Oh, yes.
So we don't have to worry about that aspect.
Yeah. And because there are so many different types of questions, putting 2 or 3 examples of the same type of question won't really work on the worksheets.
No.
And so when they've seen it in a test, yes, they've seen it before, but
not necessarily practiced it enough.
Yes.
Yes, that's true. But then, of course, past papers and those kind of things are great for them too, to help them get more exposure.
Past papers are
They're
very
the answer.
important.
I think I've got a statistic on that. In my opinion, for every paper 1 and 2 your matric student works through before the exam, they can increase their mark by at least 10%.
I need to write that down, and I'll put it on the blog, and I'll quote you.
Especially boys. Put them to work. Because girls will do that naturally, but boys won't do that naturally. But if you incentivize them with the thought that for every paper 1 and paper 2 you can improve your mark that much, they'll work like Trojans.
And also, if you compare it to sport, you don't go out and you play a cricket game without having practiced bowling. So you've got to practice.
Very true.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Okay. Group work when it will aid the learning. And the last one says formal test, longer duration, more or less every 5 to 6 weeks.
I think the CAPS actually prescribes how many you should do in a term. But I think, for me, 5 to 6 weeks is probably right. And I think it's very important that you don't ask on one section of work. Because it's the how, as I say, how to get started that the children struggle with. So the more you expose them to things mixed up together, they realize it's not a silo of information.
Yes.
And if you can find a question that will breach 2 sections, all the better. So if you can find a sequences and series question with a bit of trig in it, all the better, because they're now getting 2 sections in there. And I used to always say to my students when I was teaching, and I love teaching, in fact, when I teach now, I do guest appearances in the various classes, and the children always say to me, we can see you love it, because I don't want to go, I'm staying put. They, I'd said, and this is the kind of question you would get if I was the examiner, and they would have. So, yes, that's what I would suggest.
Okay. A test every 5 to 6 weeks. That means roughly 1.5 tests a term.
Yes, look, I would work on two formal tests a term, just myself personally. But, you're right, it would be about there. But then you'd have to probably do it every 4 weeks to get your 2 tests in. It depends what else you have to do. Like if it's an exam term, like your second term, then I wouldn't do 2, I'd do 1.
Okay.
And I would definitely expose them to work that they need more time to think about, like, say, geometry.
Okay.
It's good to put a geometry rider in there amongst some algebra, whatever. I know, normally we stick to a type of paper.
Yes, we do.
But it's a good idea, because I find with these hard things, and even like word problems, something they find incredibly difficult. But if you dribble it and you do it slowly with them, and you put in 1 every now and then, they slowly get past this anxiety on this stuff, and they actually cope a bit better. Sorry.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Don't worry. Shall we move on to the how?
Definitely.
Are you all right?
Excuse me having a choking fit here, because I'm talking too much.
Okay, well then in that case I'll read a little bit. In the how we have oral, questioning in the process of teaching, observation, a checklist, multiple choice with tests long or short, group work, checklist, observation lists, worksheets, exposure to all kinds of questions covering a wide range, written test properly designed using cognitive levels.
I think we've basically talked about the first 5.
Yes.
I think the one I'd like to concentrate on now is that last one. I don't know if you agree with me there, Helen. Is there anything else
I
you'd like me
would
to
really
unpack
like
there?
to talk about multiple choice for a little
Oh,
while.
yes, that is true. We didn't really mention that.
Yes, Dylan.
Sorry.
It's very good, Dylan. Let's
But
hear.
before we get there,
Yes.
I just want to half raise something, half ask a question. The first one, that process of asking questions during the process of teaching is not trivial.
No, actually, I'm glad you stopped me because
And-
you're quite right.
And it's something that I've seen so few teachers do well, because you need to ask specific kinds of questions in order to get
Correct.
the kind of information
Yes.
that you need. It's too often I've seen teachers say, "Does everybody understand?"
Yes.
Or not, yes.
Yes, we understand.
Meantime, they don't. You're
Mm.
quite right, Dylan. That's
So-
true.
So
I'm
may-
glad
maybe
you stopped me
just
on that.
2 minutes, just to
I actually
to
think
pick
I
up
I
on
want
some of
to
that.
cite, I mentioned earlier on that Dr. Banhar Yip from Singapore. When he was teaching in our classes, I noticed he never ever said to a child when asking them a question, "You're wrong." Not once did he use that word. Nor did he ever say to them, "You're right."
Mm.
Now, the reason why, because I asked him afterwards, why do you never say to them, "You're right" or "You're wrong"? He said, the reason why is the moment you tell you they're right or wrong, they turn off. If they're right, well, then they don't need to listen anymore because they know what they're doing. And if they're wrong, oh, I have no clue why I'm wrong, so I'm not going to bother. So what he did, and I think this was a master working with questioning, he would say to them, "Joey over here says the answer is this. What do you think? Talk to your friend." How many people got Joey's answer? And the hands would go up. And you'd see there were very few hands. And then he'd say, and Susie's answers? Let's ask Susie. Okay, Stephen, let's think about who could be right here. But never would he tell them you're right or wrong. And so he got this thing, and he was right. I think they do turn off if you tell them they're right or wrong. And so he just refused to use those. And I also said to him, so when they're wrong, you don't say, he says, no, they make the shift themselves because they look around and they say, okay, only 3 hands went up for my answer, but 20 hands went up for Susie's answer. So maybe Susie's answer is right, and they make the shift themselves. He says, because often they're not wrong, they've just misread the question. So they're misunderstanding what's been asked. So they're actually answering correctly for what they've understood.
Okay.
So now they go back to it and they look at the question again and they say, okay, maybe I need to make more sense of this. So I think he's got a point there, and I think you're right, and we are inclined to chorus the answers. So you all understand? Yes, moving on. So a very good way then is to hone in on a particular child and say, but you could have quite a fallout with some of them stress-wise, and say to them, Sue, tell me what you think. What's the answer of this? Joe, what do you think? And pass it around the class. And see, and then maybe not use that, you're right or wrong, because I think he has a very valid point there. So I think you're right. I think we've got to be careful not to just hear what we want to hear.
Yeah.
And also, when they answer, you need to understand why they're answering what they're answering. What are they misunderstanding that they're getting this answer that you know is completely off the bat?
Yes.
That's why you're asking the question, to
Correct.
get that kind of information. One of the techniques that I'm most fond of is the whiteboard technique. Even if it's just using a piece of slate or a piece of paper. Is the answer A, B, C, D? Write on your paper,
Sure.
hold it up,
That's actually lovely.
and at an instant you can gauge the level of understanding of every kid in the class without exposing any of them
Yes.
to any
That's
kind
true.
of pressure or anxiety.
That actually is a very good idea. I've never thought of using that in the high school. I use it in the primary school. They've all got their little whiteboards. So what I will do is, if I'm doing a guest appearance, because I'll go in and teach on certain things that I think we need to do more work on, and basically I use it as a dual thing. I teach the children, but I also show the teachers how you would teach that particular topic that they hate in a more effective way. And I'll get them to write on their whiteboards and show me. And then I'll pick one and say, okay, your one, let's talk about your one, or I'll pick that one. And I also noticed with him, he also did that. He photographed their answers, and then he stuck it up on the board.
Okay.
So everybody could go and have a look. And they could see, and it was very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I've seen one of the Americans is doing some research where in a geometry class they've got these whiteboards all around, and then he'll say to the children, go into your geometry writer, and they'll do it on the whiteboard. and he'll walk around or he'll sit in the middle of the class and just look around and see what they're doing. So that's another way to sort of get to what the child's doing instead of them writing in a book, which is harder to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yes, especially as we get older.
Definitely, when we get older.
Now, that process of you realizing that the class needs more work in a particular section and then you going in and teaching it, I think is really valuable for a head of department to do at any school. I remember being very frustrated that I would get criticism from...
But no help on how to fix it up.
Yes, and absolutely no help. You're not doing it right. Well, please, anyone who knows me will know that I'm quite happy to accept that I'm doing something wrong.
That's right.
Because I want to improve.
Standing around.
Yes.
No, I know, and that is a very big problem. I agree that you can make such a difference. And initially, when I was employed in this job, it was never supposed to be me going to do demonstration lessons. But the one time I did it, I was teaching how to teach non-routine problem solving, which is something we're going to talk about just now. And the reaction of the teachers was because they told me children can't do that. And I said, no, they can. And I showed them they can. Now they all love it. But it took that initial shock.
Yeah.
So I think as a head of department, it is a good thing to do. Or if you've got a member of staff that is really good at teaching whatever, pull the whole group in together and let that person teach it. The others learn. You know, Japan and them are famous for action research. And they're very big into this, where you collaboratively plan a lesson. One person presents it, you then talk about it, refine it, and the next year someone else will present it. And it really builds your teaching strengths.
So it's almost an assessment of your planning techniques and your...
And, you know, it's good. You get your colleagues inputting and telling you what they could have done, and you learn. And even at this stage of my life, for all these years, I love going to conferences and I love learning because you never know it all. If you think you know it all, you've actually missed the boat.
Yes.
And I don't care how many years you've been in a classroom, you can always learn something more.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever been to a conference and walked away learning nothing. I will learn a bit, and sometimes I'll learn a lot, but I will learn something.
Yes.
Which is great. Sorry, I'm getting
started. No. Now that we've spoken about oral questioning and those multiple choice questions, these are my favorite. I really, really enjoy setting up multiple choice question papers and finding good distractors. I
think you must be in a very small minority. Most people find them very stressful to set up.
Oh, no.
There is a whole field of study on how to set up proper multiple choice questions. They talk about your lead distractor and then the sub-distractor and all that. But I find a very efficient way is if you've given a written test to a group of kids and there's a particular question you gave them and they got all sorts of answers, take their answers and keep them for next year and put them in the multiple choice.
Yes.
Because they've done all the misunderstandings that are possible. And that's why they're getting all these different answers.
So just for those of you who haven't done a multiple choice question before, you don't put down the right answer as being 5 centimeters and then all the wrong answers be tan of 60 degrees and things like that. You must have wrong answers that could be the right answer, but there's one step that's gone wrong in the calculation.
Correct, and you can't have them too radically different, as you say, because then it's not going to do it. Because that one just gets discarded. It's not a possibility.
Yes.
A very nice one I saw the other day is it was in the junior school, and it basically said if you want to write 5% as a decimal, what is it? So it had 0.5, 0.05, 0.005, 0.0005. So that was okay because they'd have to understand that a percent was over 100 and do the necessary move. But it wasn't too radically different. It was all decimals.
Yes.
And another thing that I've noticed, because I look at Singapore sites quite often, they use, when they put it in, they always order them from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest.
Oh.
So there's no way you can tell which one is the correct one. The teacher really likes a B or likes a C. So they do that, and always it's smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest. And somewhere in there, the answer is there. And it might be the first one, might be the last one, might be the middle ones. But it's always like that, so it's easier for you to organize your choices. I know some people, when they moderate them, check to see you're not asking too many B's or too many C's. And I suppose that's because children will take a guess and go down the page.
Yes.
C, all the way through. But also with multiple choice questions, you must teach your children how to answer them. There's some that you have to just work fresh and come up with the answer and then look. There are ones where you can take the answers and substitute them in. There are ones where you can eliminate because things are not possible because you know enough maths to decide that.
Yes.
I wouldn't suggest that if you don't know enough maths. And I'm sure you can name some, Helen.
Well, not off the top of my head, but it does sound like that kind of activity would be something that they could do in a group. They could assess a set of multiple choice questions and the strategies
Correct.
to answer them. But the assessment would be an actual multiple choice question later on, not in group work.
One way you can stop them guessing is to give them a -1 penalty on it.
Ooh.
So you can let the multiple choice count 3. And then if they get it wrong, they get -1. So now they've got to think to themselves,
That
is
hurts.
it worth a guess?
Yes.
Look, it's not too much to make a difference, but it does stabilize what they get for the multiple
Yes.
choice. Depends how many multiple choice you're asking to. Most people nowadays will set maybe 5 in an exam paper, which isn't going to make any major difference to the mark. So it's fine.
I actually really like that -1 for a guess.
This stops them guessing. So the little boy or girl that's going to go C all the way down the page will think about it before they do that.
Yes, Dylan.
I have a question.
We like your questions, Dylan.
You've just said, Leigh, that often people will put maybe 5 multiple choice questions in an exam. Why?
Mostly
Why would they bother doing? Is there a particular value that you're going to get out of kids answering multiple choice questions?
I think for me it's about preparing them for those NBTs. Most students will go to the universities and write those things. And if they've never seen a multiple choice, they won't do well. The examining board we write under in our particular bunch of schools has a grade 11 one, where I think the average was scary, like at 47% for the multiple choice. And these are schools that would get 70% averages in the matric final. So we had to go and look at that and say, what are we doing? Are we preparing them properly? Because the same thing's happening when they go and write the university one, I'm sure. Plus they've got the negative advantage they're not writing with a calculator, which is another thing. So for me, it's really about, the main thing is to prepare them, but there are other things to it. I mean, it teaches them not to be distracted by false answers. There are other techniques you're teaching them within the multiple choice.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to point out here is the diagnostics you can do behind multiple choice and do it very easily. Is if you know that A represents they're not using distributive law, then you can assess very quickly that my class, 70% of them have forgotten about distributive law.
Actually, that's a lovely way of doing it. I know that when you write these, I don't know if Anna uses much in the multiple choice division. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. So I can't swear blind on that. But I know that our ACEs, which are done through the IEB, they use multiple choice. But you're never allowed to see the paper. So you can't do that, and that is a shame. You can't see, okay, that was the mistake they were making all the way through.
Yes.
Certainly within our tests we can do that.
Yes.
So I think
That
that's
is
a
a
wonderful
shame.
way to get to it. Because you get the results and you see how your group's done, but you've got to almost guess as to why they got it wrong.
Yes.
And they tell you which options they got, but it doesn't help if you haven't got the paper. So, yeah, that is the negative of that.
Yeah.
But that's a very good point, Helen. I like that.
My experience with these kinds of questions is that you should always have a distractor that involves some kind of misconception with fractions.
Correct.
And more than likely, most of the children will be distracted by that fractions question.
That is for sure. I know the other day I was helping my nephews in grade 7, and we were looking at order of operations, and it was a fraction question, but I'm not going to go there because it was quite long. But it was something like 7 minus 3, but it was all fractions, plus 1. So what he was doing is he was putting a bracket around the 3 and the 1, and how many children will do that? So that's a very good one, and you'd know, okay, when they're doing order of operations, that's the kind of mistake they made. And of course you can do it in grade 10 level with algebra.
Yes.
Same in product.
Yes.
So
Okay, and we haven't spoken about written test, properly designed using cognitive levels. And I know you've got a slide that shows us cognitive
Correct.
levels in the next slide. Thank you, Dylan.
So,
We will come back to that
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This
Yes,
one,
that
the
one.
cognitive levels. Yeah. And what I did is I found some questions that were in our school's examinations. And I thought I'd bring them along and talk about it. We've got 4 cognitive levels we should be working on, and that is our knowledge, routine, complex, and problem solving.
Yes.
And problem solving is a bad name because everybody just assumes problem solving means a word problem, and it's not the case.
Exactly.
It's off the wall kind of thinking that's not traditionally taught in a classroom, that requires the children to take their knowledge and use it on another level. And I do have one of those on there, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, what happens is the CAPS requirement is 60% on knowledge and routine.
Yes.
I find them quite hard to separate. If any of you want to look up on it, you go and have a look at the TIMS report. That's TIMMS, I think, or TIMSS, the other way.
Okay.
I think it's one of them. And they will show you what the 4 cognitive levels they use. Now, for me, knowledge is knowing, like that first question I gave you, where it says there, write down the sign of A. That's knowledge. They know that sign by definition is your opposite side over your hypotenuse, and they can do it.
Yes.
It's also a bit routine because you do how many of those in class? For me, routine is about what you've practiced in the class ad nauseum. So you've given them 20 triangles and you've asked them to find sine of theta in each of them.
Okay.
That is now a routine.
Okay.
It's something that the children, there was a very interesting...
So typical textbook questions.
Textbook question, things that you would teach at the start of a lesson with the children, things that you feel are necessary as grounding.
Okay.
Then the complex would move towards where you are merging maybe more than 2 things.
So end of chapter type questions.
End of chapter kind of things. Maybe something that requires you to use the facts. So like if you took that first question that I've got there and you just asked the C part, you didn't ask the A and the B.
And the C part says, hence show that sine A over A is equals to sine B over B.
You've given them no hints, so they've got to merge their information.
So we've left out question A and B.
Correct.
And just jump to show that sine A over A is equals to sine B over B.
See, now they've got no hints, so they've got to now make the connection. Oh, but hang on, these are right angled triangles. And so if I want the sine, I need to use opposite over hypotenuse. So now it's a much higher cognitive level that they've got to think at. And they've then got to realize they've got to do the same with B and then put them together to get the sine A over A equals sine B over B, whatever it was.
Yes.
So for me, it depends where you are. Now, you've got to be so careful about scaffolding. Because the moment that question is scaffolded like that, it becomes routine. Because they know how to, knowledge is sine A is equal to whatever, and sine B is equal to whatever. And then while you've got to show it's equal, that's also easy because you just change the subject of the thing and stick it in, and Bob's your uncle, Martha's your aunt. So now it's a routine question. It's no longer complex.
Okay. So complex, it would be a complex question by itself.
Without A and B.
But because we've introduced A and B, it's now become routine.
And we incline to, as teachers, think the children can't, so we need to scaffold.
Yes.
And yes, there is a time when you need to, but there's a time when you also need to push them that little bit further. So that 40% that is put for complex, which I think it's probably 25 of the 40%, I think, is probably complex, and 15 or 10, round about there is for the non-routine. So
which is the problem solving.
Which you call problem solving, but should be called non-routine
Yes.
problem solving, I think, in my opinion. Because I think the word problem isn't necessarily, I mean, you could practice word problems, say one's to do with speed.
Yes.
4 million of them, and they would be really good at doing it routinely because they'd seen so many of them.
Very good point there.
So it's not necessarily non-routine. For me, non-routine is just that little bit of thinking you've got to do more than what's there.
Yes.
So in the second question, again, they've scaffolded the question.
Okay, so that it's determine the product of that expression and then hence simplify.
And of course, I had a friend who used to teach, used to say, and they used to always write, hence or otherwise simplify. And he used to say to me, hence or otherwise means hence or otherwise get it wrong. Because basically that's why they're putting the hence there. They're telling you to use what you've got above there to make your life easier. But the moment you do that, as I say, that first part of that second question is now just copying your answer down.
That's true.
So it's not stretching you. Whereas if you just ask the B part, Then it goes towards complex, because now they've got to realize that it's a binomial times a trinomial, and then some simplifying with a negative in front and adding up like terms and etc. etc. So there's a much more higher cognitive need there.
Yes.
So I think you just got to be careful about it. Now, I do agree that there are times you need to scaffold, but I would take our exam papers as an example of when it's a good time to scaffold and when it's not. So if you look at our matric papers and your colleagues' other papers, see what they're doing, and if that's the norm to do that in every question, that's fine. I personally wouldn't have done it on that second one. I would have definitely let them go in there, because I would want to see, do they know how to organize their thinking and do that first part without messing into the second part.
Yes.
So I would have liked to do that, but I can see why you're isolating it so you can give marks to it.
You know, that second part would actually turn into a very good diagnostic question if you do multiple choice. You could diagnose whether they can multiply it binomial by binomial, trinomial by binomial, add like terms.
And probably putting a minus sign between it would have made it more exciting.
Ooh.
You know, there were lots of things you could do to the question to make it of a higher level. But the way it's asked at the moment, as I say, I would put it at routine. I don't think it's that hard for them to do.
Okay, it's the last question. Yes.
Dylan loves it. So
it is good. Beautiful. It says, determine the value of the following without the use of a calculator. Show all working out. And for those of you who can't see it just yet, you'll see that the first number ends with a 2, the second number ends with a 3, and the third number ends with a 1, which of course plays into x and x plus 1 and x minus 1.
And you know, that's an example of non-routine, and there are no words. Where are the words? It's just a number question. May I write something on the board here?
Please.
I just want to show you. This is also a lovely little one that is really good to teach. So
you need to write quite big. That's
I do.
good.
Is that all right?
Yes.
So say I gave them this to do. And I said to them, simplify without a calculator. Now, all they would have to do is realize that that is the difference of squares.
Yes.
So they go 64 minus 63, 64 plus 63, which then gives them 1 times those two added, which is 127. So the answer is 127.
Yes.
But you'll find that the children who don't know how to do this kind of thinking will take the 64 on the side and they'll times 64 by 64 and 63 by 63. So you need to teach them to watch the mark. Oh, they'll be very proud.
Yeah.
Why did you give us such big numbers to work out? Will be the first question you get told. But you must watch the mark allocation.
Yes.
And that's something you must teach your children to do. If it's 2 marks, they don't expect you to say 64 times 64 and 63 times 63. You'll be busy half the paper. So they need to look for these things. And this one over there, maybe you want to do that one because you did it beautifully.
It's upside down when I do it, so you'll have to do it.
I'll have to do it. You see, what they would have to realize, that if they let that first number, is it in a square root sign? Yeah, it is. Let that first number be x. So it's going to be x squared.
Yes.
Plus, and then this bracket is going to become bigger.
Yeah.
Sure. It's not often I write small, so it's unusual. I think because my eyesight isn't that wonderful, everybody else's isn't either. Now, this next one ends in a 3, does it?
Yes, it does.
So that would be the x plus 1.
Yes.
And the 1 ends in a 2, so that, a 1, so it'll be x minus 1 because that was ending in a 2. So the moment they do that, they would then say, let x equal that horrid number that I gave you there.
Yes.
And then they would just become a straightforward algebra question. So you would say it's x squared minus 1, because that's your difference of squares, which is the square root of x squared minus x squared plus 1, which then becomes the square root of 1, which is 1. And it's really a very easy question if you access that level of thinking.
Yes.
And the most amazing thing about these non-routine problems is that children that are not that good procedurally can often do them. So your weaker student can actually really surprise you by being able to do this, because it's not so dependent on the everyday learning they learn. They've just got to see, oh, hang on, there's the pattern, and work with it.
Yes.
And it'll come out relatively easy for them. So I'm very passionate about this kind of questioning.
Yeah.
It's good for them.
Okay, now this graph is very exciting for me. You've supplied us with...
What we do is
Should we show them the graph?
We should show them the graph.
What we do whenever we write our benchmarks, which are like your ANAs, is we take per school and we will analyze the marks. Now, even before I was in this job, in my own classroom, I used to take a spreadsheet and enter each question individually, what a child got for it. I then work out the average for each question, and I would say this class is an average sort of class, so I would expect them to be getting at least a 50 or whatever it might be. Whatever.
And
I
that's
think
the
so
red
if the class
line.
was really bad, I might have said, okay, I want a 40 in the class.
Okay.
But, it just depends what sort of class. If I had rocket scientists sitting in front of me, then I would set my task at probably 70. But I at the moment, that's where I'm setting it at 50 and saying, look, if they're getting 50% in a section, then I'm fairly comfortable that they have an idea of how to do this section. So if you look at the first one, which is fractions, if we look at teacher A, B, C, D, we can see that the one class there, D, is in a little bit of trouble.
Yes.
But it so turns out that that class is a relatively weak class. So I can see it in context because fractions are a difficult section for them. And I can say to myself, what can I do to help these children access that more effectively? What can we do to put in place other ways of teaching fractions or whatever it might be? But I can see that that blue and red class, A and B, is really very good at fractions.
Yes.
So I could go to that teacher and say to them, you know what, you're really making a great success with your class. Would you like to share with us in the next meeting we've got how you teach your fractions? Now, in the next one there, you can see problems, and of course, everybody knows problems is where children find it hard, although they shouldn't. And I can see that all 4 classes have got the same problem. So I need to do an intervention of some sort. Perhaps a workshop with the teachers, if I'm the head of department, or with the children, some kind of extra work. So we need to say, okay, let's go back to basics. Let's talk about why we're finding problems a difficult thing.
Okay.
Geometry, I can see that 2 of the classes are sort of there, but the others are really scary, and the overall average is scary. So I need to spend more time on my geometry. Perhaps I need to do 1 rider a week just to keep their hand in and make them more comfortable.
Yes.
Plus, I need to, when I test, put one of those in regularly so the children keep on expecting geometry in their paper and they keep revising it and going back to it. And then if I look at the next lot, which is order of operations, I see even my weak classes doing extremely well in that. They know how to use their order of operations. Nets, yes, look at that weak class. They're doing very nicely in that. And that makes sense because that is something concrete that they would find easy to access. So I'm controlled and we're happy with that. And then I go across to that last group, which is the average. And I can see there that that red class is obviously the one that is our star performers. But there might be reasons that the children, maybe the teacher's being more explicit, maybe she's got a better method of teaching. It needn't be the children that are brighter. It's just the way it is. So I need to find why that is happening. Now, if you do that with your own class's results, you can see at a glance, okay, I see that 50% of my class couldn't do question 1. Why?
Yes.
What have I done that has caused that problem? Or do I need to go back and reteach? Or is there a misunderstanding in the question? Is the question clear? Did they understand what they had to do? Maybe my paper wasn't very clear.
Yes.
That's something you've also got to think about, because sometimes especially that's why moderation is so important. Because when you're working on an exam paper, you get so familiar with the questions. And eventually you don't notice that this is missing or that's missing. So it's nice to have a colleague or someone other set of eyes looking at it and making a decision.
It's not nice, it's essential.
Yeah.
With every piece of assessment that goes out, it's
because you do. You just become you get so blasé with it because you've seen that question 40 times, you've typed it over 5 times, you've done the solution of it 10 times. You know what's in that paper.
And
But
someone else to check your weightings, to check
also
that
your
the
English,
levels.
did you express yourself clearly what you wanted?
Yes.
Are the levels correct? And perhaps here I can just mention something we were talking about earlier. I think I better stick to the black one. The green one's studying.
We have gone over time, so we need to...
Okay. Basically, as you set your test, run little columns like this and keep a record of what you're putting in. So your test isn't all down here, because then obviously you're going to get outstanding results. But you've got to have your distribution according to your CAPS document.
Now, I would go one further and say, don't just put 5 marks over there, 2 marks over there. Actually have a list going over here. And question 1.1 is 2 marks routine. 1.2 And then you can also see that your paper is actually progressing into more difficult.
And in fact, what's nice about that is after you've done the test, if you now do your analysis and you see, hang on a moment, that was routine, but I didn't get 50% of them getting it right.
Yes, and that's the
Then
goal
I've got a
for
question.
routine.
Is routine right?
Yes.
Was it routine, or did I get it wrong?
Yes.
And if I did get it right, then what have I done wrong? Because there's a reason why that's not happening. So that's actually a very good idea, to keep the questions running down the side.
And I would say also when it gets moderated, this chart
That should go with the
with
paper.
the moderation.
What I like to do is I do it myself, and then I get someone to do it impartially, and then I compare.
Yes.
What did they categorize it as? What did I categorize it as? And then where discussion happens, and that's great for professional development.
And you must be
Discussion
critical.
around it. Yes.
There's no friends in moderation.
Yeah. And I think we're going to learn not to be so sensitive about our
please,
things. And
yes,
to own them.
please.
You know, it's really professional practice, and that's why the Asian countries are doing so well, because they see it as a professional practice, not as a personal slight on them because someone disagreed with them on something. So if we can get that right, it will help our children to do that much better.
Yeah.
So just accept that, yes, there are opinions, and yes, you've got to argue out your reasons and hear your colleague and work with it.
And that act of arguing is a
Great.
professional
It's very
development
good.
thing, and it works in both ways, both for the person who supposedly knows more and the person who doesn't. It
Yes.
changes thinking, it changes practice. It's
Right, that's exactly what it is, and that's where the young teachers can contribute, like that idea of yours now, putting it down the side. I wouldn't have mentioned that, and I think that's really important. It's a very useful thing, especially when you do the post-analysis.
I've got 2 compliments today. I think that's good. Shall we read through the moderation
Yes,
slide
sure.
very quickly? It says check the cognitive levels, which we've spoken about. Another set of eyes to check for accuracy, to check you are assessing what you think. That is such an important point.
So important. You think you're asking something, but you're asking something totally different.
That happens.
It does happen.
Yes, you think, yes. I
It's a
can't think
horrible
of an
feeling,
example
but it does
now, but
happen.
it has happened, and it's a
It has
horrible
happened to me
feeling.
in my life as well.
Mm.
And then just the 4 levels.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Knowledge,
what we've been
routine,
talking.
complex, and non-routine. And you
I
say
call it
the
non-routine, but problem
TIMS.
thing. The TIMS, if you go and look at that report, they give you like a breakdown of what these 4 levels are. And both are the private schools and the government schools, maths is done on those 4 levels.
Yes.
Everybody else uses old Blooms, and of course Blooms, you've got to revise Blooms and existing Blooms, but we use TIMS in
Yes.
maths. And I think it's right. I think more than that might be. There is a talk at the moment about making knowledge level 1 and level 2, routine level 1 and level 2, so moving almost to 8 levels, but I don't know how far that's going to get.
Oh.
That's still maybe pending.
And we're already saying that knowledge and routine are almost the same
almost the
thing,
same
but now
thing.
we're going to divide those again. Oh.
That's what I've heard, but I mean, I haven't seen the proof of the pudding yet, but that's the talk out in the maths world,
Well,
that they are thinking along that. I think maybe with problem solving, it's one that they need to maybe separate, because you can get 2 different levels of problem solving or non-routine problem solving. So
yes,
yes,
it's this
maybe.
huge category that's reduced to 15% of the paper, and that's pretty much one question, isn't it?
It is pretty much that, and usually it's got a few parts to it. But
Yes. Oh dear. Well, with that, we must say goodbye. We've gone 10 minutes over.
Terribly sorry, I talked
Yes,
too much.
it was a good chat. Thank you, and you'll be joining us again next week.
Yes, I will be.
Yes, what is your topic next week?
Next week, it's about planning, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well done. 5 points.
It's amazing after the week I've had so far that I do remember that.
Good, and thank you, Dylan, for your comments and your button pushing.
And for keeping me in line and not forgetting important things, Dylan.
So join us again next week when we talk about planning. Goodbye. Usually I'm good at watching time.